Hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest edition of the Post with BP. I'm your host, Billy Parvatam. Folks, I'm so excited today to be joined by my friend Chris Finch. Chris is a video coordinator with Davidson Athletics in North Carolina. He's a Virginia Tech alum, and he joins me for the third straight year for our March Madness preview podcast where we make all our picks and put our money where our mouth is and make our predictions. Chris, thanks so much for joining me. It really feels like a tradition at this point.
Yeah, I guess three in a row does make it a tradition, huh? I appreciate you having me. This is awesome. Look forward to this every year.
Yeah, for sure. It's also a good opportunity for us to catch up face to face virtually because I know we text often throughout the year, but it's a great opportunity. And for those who don't know, me and Chris also overlapped academically. We both graduated from Tech undergrad 2019 and masters in 2021. Can you believe, Chris, that it's been 5 years this May since we graduated? It feels like time just flies.
Yeah, I didn't really recognize that until somebody said it to me maybe a couple months ago. Like, can you believe it's been 5 years since we finished undergrad? And I was like, don't say that to me. I don't want to feel like I'm that old yet.
Yeah, for sure. And we were lucky too because we were basically what the last spring graduation before COVID, which kind of messed
Yep.
things up for a few years. So yeah, certainly we were lucky from that perspective. Well, Chris, let's go to why you're on this podcast, and that is because the March Madness tournament is upon us. Games, we're really the first four games will start for the men's tournament Tuesday and Wednesday, and then the round of 64 will start on Thursday. Before we kind of get to the bracket and talk about making our picks and how we like things to shape up this year, I wanted to ask you. I feel like I ask you this question every year, but maybe it changes based on the year. And obviously, the more you fall in love with March Madness every year that you watch it. If you were trying to describe March Madness, Chris, to someone who had never seen it before, how would you describe it to them, and how would you entice them to watch it?
Well, I always say to my friends and my family that it's the most wonderful time of the year. Not Christmas, not Easter, not even the 4th of July. I think even if you don't like college basketball, I think a pick'em style bracket with a bunch of fun colors and fun teams and fun logos is a lot of fun to do for anybody from a really avid basketball fan to somebody who's not. And I think it's also a great way to get community together for a couple weeks out of the year in March and April, getting out, going out and watching the games. And the bracket kind of allows you to feel personally connected to each of the teams in a way. Even if you've never watched them play all year, it's a fun little part of American culture. And, the more I work in sports, the more I love and look forward to March Madness every year.
Yeah, I'm curious, how has your perspective changed? Because you're with Davidson, so kind of like a mid-major school. So I remember we were texting earlier that you've kind of been following the mid-major schools more, especially being in the A10 with Davidson. So I feel like, in some extent, it's only enhanced your love for college basketball and March Madness now that you're covering and working at a smaller school like Davidson.
For sure. I think a lot of the major networks for most of the year are only covering, your power conference schools and then maybe, schools that the previous year may have had a really good year, like the Mountain West Conference, for example, is a many bid league this year. But, working at a smaller school, you really get to tap into, the stories of scholar athletes at smaller schools. And it's a pretty cool perspective and experience. And it is kind of helpful in March Madness time where, I look at the Duquesne BYU matchup a lot differently, where I might not know anything about Duquesne 3 years ago, but now like I know their coach, their best few players, and it's kind of like that with a lot of other schools too. So definitely working at a smaller school is beneficial in that regard, but we'll see how it shakes out when we actually start picking them.
Yeah, I was gonna say I will need you to educate me on some of these smaller schools since you're more familiar with that. And for there is photo evidence, folks, that Chris has met the most famous Davidson alum of all time, Steph Curry. You can look that up on his Instagram. I still remember you, Chris. I feel like you strategically made sure you were right next to him in that picture.
Well, it was funny. So we were about to go out to his graduation. So like he like during the year where they won the championship and they beat the Celtics in the NBA finals, during that process he was actually going back to school to finish his degree. And at Davidson, you are not allowed to be inducted into the Hall of Fame or have your name and jersey in the rafters unless you're a Davidson graduate. So we had this ceremony called Curry for Three, in which he got his degree first, and then he got his induction ceremony into the Hall of Fame, and then he got his jersey retired and his number up in the rafters where it belongs. So, but the staging area happened to be our office. So our director of athletic communications, Joey Beeler, was like, "Hey, do you want to get a picture of these guys before he goes out?" And he's like, "Oh, yeah, of course." And um, I was kind of standing face to face with my boss, Justin. Like, he's been there longer than me, so should he stand next to Steph? But I'm already kind of next to him, and Justin kind of pushed me next to him, and we all got the picture. And then he went out, graduated, did the whole thing. So it was kind of cool.
Yeah, it's definitely a great story you can remember forever. Well, let's get right to it, Chris. The March Madness bracket. Let's start looking at this bracket and make our picks here. Before we get to making our picks, I did want to kind of run a few numbers by you, just in terms of if you look at multiple bids by each conference. You've got the Big 12 and Southeastern Conference tied with 8 bids. You've got the Big 10 with 6, Mountain West with 6, ACC with 5, Pac-12 with 4, Big East with 3. I know a lot of people thought they probably should have had more than that. The American with 2, West Coast with 2, and the A10, which is your home conference with Davidson, also has 2. Then you've got a bunch of ones in there. You look at the best odds to win. If you look at the betting favorites, UConn, the defending champion, is currently plus 400. Houston plus 500, Purdue plus 650, Arizona and North Carolina plus 1200, Tennessee plus 1400, Auburn 1500, Kentucky 1700, and then you've got Creighton at 2500 actually to round out the top 10. Iowa State a little bit above them with plus 2000 odds. So you kind of look at this tournament. If you look at it from a broad perspective, Chris, what are some of your biggest storylines looking at March Madness this year?
Well, look at the top 4 seeds in each region, and it really screams that there are so many schools that can cut down the nets and win this national championship. It's a really deep field, and it's also a field where I'm looking at a couple of the mid-major teams, and there are a lot of double-digit seeds, that are going to be able to make runs in this thing. St. Peter's did it as a 15 seed a couple years ago. They're back in it. Well, maybe they do it again, maybe they don't. But I think at the very, tippy top, it looks like a really, really tough field to pick. And then at the very bottom, you have a couple of teams, I think, that can really surprise people, make some noise, and potentially make a deep run.
Yeah, I think, Chris, the biggest storyline to think about is, people are coming in. Obviously, UConn being the number 1 overall seed, the defending champion. I just told you that they have they're the most favored to win the championship again this year. The last 6 defending champions have not even made it to the Sweet 16, so they haven't even advanced out of the first weekend. So I think that's something to think about here, as UConn's getting all this hype, well deservedly so, of being the number 1 overall seed. And I just think it's cool, Chris, that a lot of these kind of you mentioned it, 1 and 2 seeds haven't won the championship in a while. I mean, you think about it, Houston, they've actually made 6 Final Fours, but have never won the championship. That's the most for any program in history, most Final Fours, but never won the championship. Purdue's never won. Tennessee's never won. Auburn's never won. Iowa State's never won. Creighton's never won. Kentucky last won in 2012, so over 10 years ago. Arizona last won in 97. Even UNC, I mean, it's been, 7 years for since their last title. That kind of feels like a long gap for that kind of program. So I just like the fact that there's so many of these high seeds that have not won in a while, so they're motivated. And also, Chris, I think this is even more interesting. Look at all the bid stealers. I mean, you think about it. There's probably 6 or 7 teams that were left out of this tournament where if their conference tournaments had gone differently, they're probably in the tournament right now. Teams like Oklahoma, St. John, some of these Big East schools that got snubbed. You look at like NC State. I mean, what incredible run they had in DC with the ACC tournament. Kevin Keats, their head coach, ends up getting some big incentives, money wise, then also a 2-year extension. And then how about, I think, the story of the tournament? Arguably, Long Beach State head coach Don Munson was reportedly fired before the conference tournament. Then all of a sudden, he goes in there and leads Long Beach State to the Mountain West Conference tournament title. So I think, Chris, the fact that you've had so many different bid stealers, quote unquote, kind of sneak their way into the tournament, winning their conference tournaments, I think makes for also an exciting tournament as well.
Absolutely. And put my A10 hat on here, Duquesne going in as the 6th seed in the Atlantic 10 tournament and beating Dayton. The Duquesne actually started A10 play 0-5. They were bottom of the barrel team for quite a while. And on the back of Day Grant, made a big run in February to kind of put them in a position to be a top 8 team. And then, we're able to get it done at the tournament to allow the A10 to be a 2-bid league. But like you said, NC State, an incredible run. Oregon as well, getting in out of the Pac-12, potentially pushing teams like Seton Hall, St. John's out for the Big East, like you said. 3 bids. You could argue that maybe they should get 4 or 5, but it's more bid stealers this year, I think, than we've seen in a long time.
For sure. Well, let's get right to it, Chris, finally, and make our picks and keep it moving with this bracket. So I think what we'll do is we'll kind of go through each region and go one by one, make our picks. And then once we've kind of determined who's going to make the final four from that region, we'll kind of go back and kind of recap the region and what are some big storylines we see in there, if that works for you. So let's now go to the top right region and trying to remember which one this is. It's the one with UConn as the number one seed, the East region. There you go. So first, we'll start off with the defending champion, like I talked about it. UConn, number one seed overall, taking on number 16 Stetson. There have been two 16 over one upsets in the last couple of years. We all, as Tech fans, remember UMBC over UVA, and then last year Farley Dickinson over Purdue. Do you think Stetson has what it takes to upset the defending champion?
I don't. Stetson has a great story making the tournament for the first time, and I'm going with UConn.
I agree with you. I'm going with UConn. Not much else to say there. We move on now to the 8-9 matchup. We've got FAU, who made the Final Four last year against Northwestern out of Illinois. Who do you like in this matchup?
Yeah, interesting in this region. It has three of the four Final Four teams from last year. FAU, as talented as they are and as experienced as they are, I think I actually have a Northwestern beating them. I think FAU has shown some vulnerabilities throughout the year.
I'm going to go FAU. I think you'll see in a theme of this bracket that I picked that I'm going to lean on experience. So I'm going FAU based on their Final Four run last year. So there you go. Already one disagreement there. So one of us is guaranteed not to have a perfect bracket. That's for sure. Let's go now to the 5-12 matchup. We've got San Diego State, who was the runner-up last year, losing to UConn, taking on UAB in the 5-12 matchup. What do you like, Chris?
San Diego State barely escaped Charleston in the 5-12 last year, but looked really strong. I'm going to pick San Diego State again in the 5-12 this year to advance.
I'm going with San Diego State as well. Brian Dutcher, one of the veteran coaches in the game, so I like him to make it to the second round. We move now to Auburn and Yale. Auburn had a great season in the SEC. I believe they won the SEC tournament, if I'm not mistaken, defeating Florida, and they're also taking on Yale, who seems like a perennial Ivy League representative in the NCAA tournament. They've been known for some big upsets in previous years. Who do you have advancing in this matchup?
I love the Ivies typically, but Auburn playing with a lot of momentum and playing with a lot of toughness right now, winning the SEC. I got them winning this.
Actually, Chris, I don't know if you follow. I think it's called like On This Day in Sports Twitter page. They always like every day have something like, oh, on this day 10 years ago this happened. I was scrolling on Twitter and I saw that. I don't know if you remember Torian Prince having that what is a rebound question, kind of explain what a rebound was after Baylor lost. And I believe that Baylor loss was to Yale when Baylor was a 3 seed and Yale was a 14 seed. So based on that, I am picking Yale to go with the upset here. You know, there's going to be some of those in this tournament. So I am going with Yale to upset Auburn there. So another disagreement there. We move now to the 6-11 matchup, BYU and Duquesne. I know you know Duquesne very well. And statistically, Chris, 11-6 is typically the upset that happens the most frequently.
Yeah, this is a tough one for me. I lost a little bit of sleep over this one. I think, Duquesne, they made a great run in the A-10 championship, but those runs they take so much, physically, emotionally just to get there. And you have to wonder, just like it happened with Virginia Tech in an 11-6 a few years ago, or a couple years ago, where they made the big run to win the ACC, ran out of gas, and they got beat pretty handily by Texas. I think BYU is a very dangerous team, great three-point shooting team. I'm going to have them over the Dukes in the 6-11.
I am going with Duquesne to advance. You'll see in a common theme here. I am going with the 11 to upset the 6. So already a lot of disagreements, and we're only, 3 or 4 games in. We move now to Illinois Morehead State, the 3-14 matchup. Chris, I'm sure you remember this. I was looking at this, trying to remember the year, and I found I think it was 2011 when Morehead State upset Louisville in the tournament. I remember that big 3 they hit at the end. So that's kind of, when I hear Morehead State, that's what I think about first. Do you think they pull off the upset here against Illinois?
I think Morehead, like, they're a good team, but I think I'm going to pick Illinois. It was another tough one. This entire region has got a lot of really intriguing matchups to me, but I'm going to pick Illinois to advance.
I'm going with Illinois as well. I really like Terrence Shannon Jr. They're also the Big Ten tournament champions. They were able to win that tough conference, so I'm going with Illinois to advance. Now go rather to the 7-10 matchup, Washington State and Drake. Who do you like in this 7-10 matchup?
I think America is actually picking Drake. I am going with Washington State just because I want to root for Washington State because I love the story. First time making the tournament in forever. I think Drake's a good team. They'll be back, sooner rather than later. So I'm going to pick the 7 in this one.
I'm going with Drake simply because one of my good friends, Shamar Parker, always bets on Drake during the regular season. So I'm gonna do him a favor here and pick one of his favorite betting teams. I'm going with Drake to advance. So now we go to the 2:15 matchup: Iowa State and South Dakota State. Iowa State, man, did they demolish Houston in the Big 12 tournament, Chris? But what do you like? Do you think South Dakota State can pull the upset here?
I like Iowa State. I like them as a national championship contender. Very good, very deep team. Picking the Cyclones to advance.
I agree with you. I am going with the Cyclones as well. So, and now as we move to the round of 32, this is where it's going to start getting confusing, and we're going to have to keep track of our own picks because we're gonna, I'm sure, differ here. So, I had UConn and FAU, Chris. I'm going with UConn. I think defending champion. Now it would actually be bucking the trend of, again, like I said, the 6 straight years that defending champion hasn't made the Sweet 16, and I think FAU would be a tough opponent, but I think UConn has enough to break that streak and go to the Sweet 16. How about you? Do you have UConn advancing over Northwestern?
Yeah, I'm very high on UConn this year. I have a bunch of friends of mine from the Northeast that are actually not UConn fans. They're fans of other Big East schools, so they're giving me a hard time a lot about this. But yeah, I'm picking a UConn to kind of break the curse and go to the Sweet 16.
And in this next matchup, who did you have with the what did you have? UAB and Auburn?
At San Diego State and
San Diego
Auburn.
State. Yep. So
Yep. But yeah, picking Auburn in this one. Auburn's another team that I'm pretty high on as well. I like Coach Pearl, and I don't know if San Diego State is going to go back-to-back deep runs in this tournament.
I have San Diego State and Yale. I am gonna keep it going with the Aztecs. I think Yale's Cinderella story ends there. So I'll have SDSU advancing in the next matchup. I believe you had BYU and Illinois. So who do you have
Yes.
advancing in that matchup?
I got Illinois. I think Terrence Shannon, like you said, 20 plus point per game score. I think they're going to have enough offense to outgun the BYU 3-point shooting attack and advance into the Sweet 16.
I've got Illinois and Duquesne, and I also believe that Duquesne's run ends in the round of 32. I'm going with the Fighting Illini. And then in the next matchup, I have Iowa State and Drake. I'm going with Iowa State. You talked about it. I think I'm high on them to make kind of a sneaky run. I mean, they're a 2 seed, but I think maybe not as getting as much attention as maybe some of the other 2 seeds and 1 seed. So I've got the Cyclones going to the Sweet 16 over Drake. You had Iowa State and Washington State. Who wins the Battle of the States?
I'm going to go Iowa State. I think they play a type of defense that can really rattle a team like Washington State, who hasn't played a whole lot of helter-skelter type teams when they're playing out in the Pac-12. I'm going to have Iowa State advancing here.
So in our Sweet 16 hypothetical matchups, I have UConn and San Diego State, and you had UConn and Auburn.
Mm-hmm.
So who do you have between the Tigers and the Huskies?
I think in a battle of 2 really good coaches, I'm going to go with Dan Hurley, UConn team, a lot of NCAA tournament experience. I think is what's going to get him into the Elite Eight once again. Going with the Huskies.
I have a rematch of last year's final, UConn and San Diego State. I believe UConn will have the edge again and advance to the Elite Eight. And then in the other Elite Eight matchup, I believe we both had Illinois and Iowa State. So who do you have advancing yours?
Yeah, pick the Cyclones. I think the big run for the Illini ends in the Sweet 16. Illinois is a good team. Could definitely see them, pulling out a battle between these 2 Midwestern schools, but going to go with Iowa State and have them match up against UConn in the Elite Eight.
I am going with Illinois, believe it or not. I feel like I was looking at my bracket and I was like, I can't have too much chalk. I need to have some eraser somewhere. I am picking Illinois to make it happen in this spot and advance to the Elite Eight over Iowa State. So I believe I have UConn and Illinois in the Elite Eight, and you have UConn and Iowa State. So, I mean, pretty standard, 1-3 and 1-2. Who do you have advancing your matchup?
I'm going to be a lame-o. I got the 1 seed going into the Final Four. Tristan Newton, Cam Spencer, etc. A team with a lot of talent, a team that's really deep, good offensively and defensively. Perfect recipe for a Final Four team. So I think they'll get it done.
And I am picking the Fighting Illini to advance to the Final Four. I just think, Chris, we talk about how hard it is to win in college basketball. I mean, with the upset anything can happen in this tournament. I am not as high on UConn as other people are. I'm going with Illinois. I really think they have a chance to make it this year. So there you go in the East region. Chris has probably the more standard pick, UConn, to go to the Final Four. I am picking Illinois. But as you look at this region, Chris, to recap, anybody you think is a big threat to UConn in terms of maybe could knock them off early, or another team that has a chance to make it far?
I think San Diego State and Auburn, both in that 4 or 5, whoever comes out of that game and wins, I think could really pester UConn and give them a hard time. Both of those teams defensively are both wired really well. And I think Iowa State could do the same thing. I by no means think it is an easy region for UConn to get out of. I think that they can win their first 2 games pretty handily, but it's going to be a dogfight in the Sweet 16. It's going to be a dogfight in the Elite Eight if they're going to want to get back to the Final Four.
Yeah, I just think the fact that you mentioned it, 3 out of last year's Final Four teams are in this region. I think shows you that there's several teams here. Then also you factor in Illinois and Iowa State that have a chance to really make some noise. So that's why I think, all being said, you might have an argument for this being maybe the toughest region, even though UConn's probably the best team going into the tournament. But I think we can both agree it's going to be a fun one to watch. So let's now move on to the South region, Chris. We'll first start with Houston, the #1 seed, taking on Longwood, a school we both know being Virginians. Do you think Longwood has what it takes to upset Houston, or are you going with the Cougars in this one?
I will say if I am going with the Cougars, but I think if there's going to be a 16-1 upset this year, I think it would be in this game. Longwood's a really good team, 16 seed just by virtue of playing in a very, small conference. But I think if there is a 16-1, I think that's the one to watch for, but I'm going to go with Houston.
I agree with you. I am going with Houston. Not much else to say there. We next move on to the 8-9 matchup. Nebraska taking on former Virginia Tech head coach Buzz Williams as the #9 seed. Now he's with Texas A&M. What do you like about this matchup? Who do you have advancing?
I got Texas A&M advancing. Made a deep run in the SEC tournament, enough to get them into the tournament. Some people thought that they were a bubble team. They were going to be in the first 4 out, not going to make it with all the bid stealers, but seemed to be fairly comfortably in as a 9 seed. I'm totally blanking on the dude's name, but Texas A&M made a change in their starting lineup, brought somebody new into the lineup, and they've been pretty dominant ever since. And Tyrese Radford has been playing college basketball for like 15 years. So, they got a lot of veteran presence on that team.
I'm going to go with Texas A&M as well. I will always be grateful to Buzz Williams for making our college experience in undergrad so awesome. I mean, I was looking back, Chris. I think when we were in school and, obviously the Hokies under Buzz made 3 straight NCAA tournament appearances. That was the first time in 32 years that the Hokies had made back-to-back NCAA tournament appearances. Just think about all those generations of Tech fans or really Tech students that came to Virginia Tech. And we were the first group of people in 30 years to be able to make the tournament 2 years in a row and eventually 3 years in a row, and obviously culminating in a Sweet 16 loss. So I think that shows you how lucky we were. So I'll always be grateful to Buzz for that. I am rooting for the Aggies to make it to the second round. We move next to the 5-12 matchup. Wisconsin, the Badgers, runner-ups in the Big Ten tournament, upset Purdue in the semifinals, taking on another school we know well from the great Commonwealth of Virginia, James Madison, just up the road from Blacksburg. Who do you have in this matchup?
I got James Madison. They're a 30-win team, and I'm usually pretty high on 30-win teams in March Madness just because, when you have a culture of winning around your program, it's, I think it bleeds into the postseason a little bit. Definitely, buying into the hype. I think a lot of people are high on JMU this year, but a little bit of Virginia school bias, a little bit of ESPN bias. I'm going to take the 12 or the 5 here.
I agree with you. I'm going with JMU as well. I want to see some upsets, and I have a feeling JMU has what it takes to pull it off against the Badgers. So we both agree there. We move next to Duke, Vermont, 4-13. John Shire in his second year after Coach K retired, the legendary coach. Doesn't seem to be missing a beat. John Filipowski and those guys seem to be doing well. Do you think they advance over Vermont?
I think they do. I don't think the American East has won a tournament game since UMBC, I want to say. Vermont has been in it a few years in a row now, kind of around the 13 or 14 seed. Haven't been able to get it done. I don't think they'll get it done again this year.
I agree with you. I'm going with the Duke Blue Devils to advance. So far, I think we agree on every single pick. I think that shows you the different contrasts in the regions. We move next to Kentucky and Oakland, 3-14. Kentucky. I think you can make an argument, Chris. I mean, John Calipari is probably the most recognizable coach now in the game. When you talk about Coach K retired, Coach Boeheim retired, Coach Williams retired in the last couple of years, he's always got a good team talent wise, and they're taking on Oakland in a 3-14 matchup. Who do you have advancing?
I am going to go with Kentucky, but there's a great video that everybody should watch where to sell tickets to their championship game, Oakland's head coach was handing out tickets at a McDonald's window and working a McDonald's drive-through for a few hours. So it was pretty cool. But yeah, gonna go with Kentucky. Oakland has lost and lost handily to many tournament teams this year.
And not just the college. I mean, the city as well. The Oakland Athletics are eventually leaving Las Vegas, or rather leaving Oakland to go to Las Vegas. I think the L's keep coming for Oakland. I am going with Kentucky to advance. We've got Florida and the winner of the Boise State Colorado game, the 7-10 matchup. Who do you think wins this one, Chris? Do you have Boise State or Colorado winning, or do you think Florida is advancing regardless?
I think Florida advances regardless. I have Boise State over Colorado just by virtue of how battle tested they are and how many quad one wins they have. I don't think by any means it'll be an easy out for Florida, but little SEC bias there. Going to go with the Gators.
I agree with you. I have the Florida Gators advancing regardless. We move next to the 2-15 matchup, Marquette and Western Kentucky. I believe Marquette's missing one of their big guys, but Shaka Smart, he's one of the veteran coaches of this tournament. We all remember as Virginia guys, him taking VCU to the Final Four back in 2011. So, do you think Marquette advances to the second round here?
Yeah, I think Marquette does advance. They're missing though one of my favorite college basketball players currently, and Tyler Kolek. I have his jersey right here. But yeah, I think how deep of a tournament run they make is completely conditional on how healthy he is and whether or not he's able to play. So, gonna go with Marquette for round one and hope that TK can stay healthy.
And I can't believe I actually skipped over it, Chris. 6-11, Texas Tech and NC State. Maybe the most intriguing first round
Yeah.
matchup in this bracket of this region. When you talk about what Texas Tech was able to do, battle tested in the Big 12, and then NC State, that incredible run, 5 wins in the ACC tournament in 5 days, the first team to do it. And not only that, Chris, they beat 5 previous champions that have won it all since 2000: Louisville, Syracuse, Duke, UVA, and UNC. So just an incredible run. Do you think, maybe it's shades of 83, Jim Valvano survive and advance? Do you think they advance in the first round, or do you think they're too gassed from the AC tournament and burn out like Tech did a few years ago?
I know I just made the argument on the other side of the bracket where Duquesne made this big run and they can't do it, but I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. Go Pack, go, baby. I'm
I agree.
seeing little shades of Jim Valvano in there.
I agree with you. I like the DJ boys, DJ Horn, DJ Burns. By the way, the way DJ Burns just destroyed Armando Bacot in the final, I think was just a beauty to see, considering the fact that he doesn't look as athletic as some of these other guys, but he's doing his thing. So I agree with you. I'm going with the Cardiac Pack to advance. So I believe, Chris, if I'm not mistaken, we agreed on every single game in
That
that region,
never
which
happens.
yeah, which means it's definitely going to be wrong in 2 or 3 of these. That this is the way that goes.
Yeah.
So this one will be easy to remember. The second round in that region would be Houston and Texas A&M. Who do you have advancing in this battle of Texas schools?
Intriguing matchup, but I'm gonna have Houston winning the Battle of Texas.
I agree with you. I'm going Houston as well. This will be intriguing. Duke versus the Dukes. James Madison and the Duke Blue Devils. Who do you have advancing in this potential matchup?
I really like Duke as a team. Struggled a little bit to end the season, but I think they have all the pieces to make a Sweet 16 run. I think James Madison's run ends here. I got the Blue Devils.
Yeah, I don't know about you, Chris. Maybe you disagree. I just feel like since Coach K is gone, I'm not saying I don't still despise Duke, but I don't hate them as much maybe as they just don't have the same luster maybe as they did back in the day with Coach K. So I think Duke has what it takes to make it to the Sweet 16. We both agree there. The next matchup, NC State and Kentucky. Who would you have making it to the Sweet 16?
No, all good things must come to an end, and I think that's when the train will run out of gas a little bit, get off the rails, and allow for Kentucky to advance to the Sweet 16. Just really like Kentucky's depth, really balanced scoring. I want to say they have 4 or 5 guys that average double-figure scoring per game. Just a deep team, and I think DJs will run out of gas.
Yeah, I mean, Kentucky's got a great backcourt with Shepard and Reeves, but I am going with the cardiac pack. I just think Kentucky's been known to get upset the last couple of years. We remember St. Peter's upset them when they were a 15 over a 2 with Kentucky. So I just think, if the pack can keep going with the momentum, I think they've got a chance to upset a team like Kentucky. So I have the Wolfpack going to the Sweet 16, and then we both had Florida and Marquette 7-2. Who do you have advancing in this matchup?
This is where Tyler Kolek, can really kind of, hinge things here. The Shaka Smart says that he is optimistic that he is going to play both games the first weekend. So with that in mind, I think a full strength Marquette does beat Florida. I think Marquette can win if they don't have TK. I think it'll be tougher, but I do have them advancing.
I agree with you. I also have Marquette advancing in the Sweet 16. So in one Sweet 16 matchup, we both have Houston and Duke. Who do you have making it to the Elite Eight?
I think Houston's lockdown defense is going to get them into the Elite Eight. I think they're going to be able to have enough talent offensively to outpace them while having the defensive presence to lock down Filipowski.
Yeah, I think that Houston, the fact that they laid an egg in the Big 12 tournament against Iowa State, I think is going to really motivate them to stay focused in this tournament. And I am going with Houston as well over Duke. In the other Elite Eight matchup, or rather Sweet 16 matchup, I have NC State and Marquette, and you had Marquette and Kentucky. Who makes it to the Elite Eight?
Now I'm going to be a lame-o and have another, spoiler, another 1-2 matchup. I think this is where, like you said, Kentucky is a little bit prone for a little bit of an early exit. I think TK will stay healthy, and I think it sets up for a Houston-Marquette Elite Eight matchup.
NC State will be this year's Cinderella team. I am picking them over Marquette to go to the Elite Eight. Again, you talked about fatigue might play a factor, but I think if you're playing on adrenaline in this tournament, you may have a shot. So I'm going with NC State. So you have Houston and Marquette. I have Houston and NC State. Who advances in your matchup?
I think the Big East, the top of the Big East, has been a conference that has been really, really good throughout the season. I think that they're one of the more battle-tested leagues over the Big 12. I am going to have Marquette advancing and going 2 for 2 with the Big East in the Final Four.
Wow. Okay. So you are picking against Houston. I have Houston and NC State, and this is where the run ends for NC State. I am going with the Cougars. I think they'll be too much to match for the Wolfpack, but I am picking Houston to advance to the Final Four. So we disagree in that region as well. I have Houston. You have Marquette. So at least when we get to the Final Four, that's where we're disagreeing, and that's typically where the brackets are decided if you're doing these bracket pools, because everyone thinks, oh, it's about all the upsets you have, but it's really who are the teams you have standing at the end. And so I think the fact that we have some different teams, I think definitely great to see here. So let's now go on to the West region. We'll start off with North Carolina playing the winner of Howard and Wagner. Hopefully, I have those schools right. Regardless, I mean, for me, it doesn't matter who they're playing. UNC is going to advance. How about you?
Correct. Yep. UNC.
And then in the 8-9 matchup, we have the Battle of MSU, Michigan State and Mississippi State. So I've always thought it's going to be kind of funny that I think that there's probably going to be someone betting on that game, and they're going to bet the wrong MSU when they intended to pick the other one. But who do you have in this matchup?
I'm going to go with Michigan State, just Tom Izzo in March. Hasn't really worked out last couple years. Honestly, I kind of forget what Michigan State did last year. Not good. But Michigan State just still has that like name recognition, blue-bloodedness to me that, is just going to make me pick them over Mississippi State just because I don't know anything about them.
Yeah, Michigan State actually made to the Sweet 16 last year. They upset Marquette, I think, in the second round. So, yeah, as John Rothstein says, January, February, Izzo. I think that theme continues. I'm going with Michigan State as well. We have St. Mary's and Grand Canyon. St. Mary's did a good job in the Mountain West. Grand Canyon, a 12 seed. Who do you have advancing this matchup?
This is another really tough matchup, another 5-12 that could really go either way. I had the pleasure of watching St. Mary's play in person this year, actually. Went out to Moraga, California on another one of those Curry trips. So St. Mary's did a number on the Davidson Wildcats this year with some great ball movement and great three-point shooting. They're a good three-point shooting team. They're the class of that West Coast Conference this year, and I have them advancing over Grand Canyon.
I'm going Grand Canyon. My boy Shamar, that's another one of his betting teams. He always raves about him. I am going with Grand Canyon, trying to sprinkle in another upset there. So there you go with that matchup. Alabama and Charleston, 4-13. Again, it still amazes me, Chris, that these last couple years we've actually been talking about Alabama basketball because everyone knows Saban and the football team is so great, but Nate Oates is doing a good job with the Crimson Tide. Who do you have advancing in this matchup?
So, spoiler alert, Charleston is going to be my Cinderella team this year. I have them beating Alabama. Alabama a little bit vulnerable. They have shown uh, signs of weakness this year. They're a pretty bad team against the three. Charleston is a very deep team. They shoot the three very well, and they don't turn the ball over. Very disciplined brand of basketball. I think they're going to outdiscipline Alabama for the win.
I'm going to go with Alabama. I just think first round they'll have what it takes to beat Charleston in advance. So I'm going with the Roll Tide there. 6-11 matchup, Clemson, New Mexico. Clemson in what people would argue was a weak ACC this year was kind of one of the teams that stood out. But then they lost. They got destroyed by Boston College in the ACC tournament. So they're kind of coming in not on the best footing. And then New Mexico won their conference tournament. So they're kind of coming in with some momentum. Who do you have advancing in this matchup?
I've got New Mexico. Clemson 10-10 in their last 20 games. I really have never got the Clemson hype throughout the year. I know that they had a really good non-con, but since ACC play, they have really not done much to impress me. Gonna go with the Lobos.
One of my great friends that I met while doing collegiate summer wood league baseball in Wisconsin, Jacob Giroux. He is a New Mexico season ticket holder, so to make him happy, I'm going with the Lobos to advance. Richard Pitino, he's done a great job, so we both agree there. Baylor and Colgate, 3-14. Who do you have advancing in this matchup?
Colgate feels like they're a perennial NCAA tournament team at this rate. I think they've made 3 in a row. Still going to go with the Baylor Bears out of the Big 12 to advance.
Yeah, Baylor won the championship 2 years ago. I think Scott Drew has that team back on track. I am going with Baylor. Actually, they won it 3 years ago now. Hard to believe in 2021, but still believe Baylor ends up advancing. We have the 7-10 matchup, Dayton and Nevada. Who ends up advancing in that game?
This is a tough matchup, I think, for Dayton. I think Nevada plays a really disciplined style of basketball, but Nevada doesn't have one person, and his name is Deron Holmes, Dayton's star player. I'm going to go with the Flyers.
Chris, I visited Las Vegas a few years ago, and to be honest, it wasn't my favorite city. I know I'll have to eventually visit there anyway because the A's are going there, so I'm trying to see all 30 baseball stadiums. But because I wasn't a big fan of Vegas, I'm going to go with Dayton, completely unrelated to basketball. I think they advanced to the second round. And then in the 2-15 matchup, Chris, we've got Arizona Long Beach State. Who do you have advancing?
Long Beach State's coach is finally going to get to go on his vacation. I'm going to go with the Arizona Wildcats.
Yeah, great story for Don Munson, but I think the road ends here. I am also going with Arizona to advance to the second round. So in the round of 32 in the West region, we both have UNC and Michigan State. Who do you have advancing?
I think Michigan State's run will come to an end here. Got the Tar Heels advancing.
Yeah, I just think the Carolina Tar Heels basically have the same team that lost the championship to the Wildcats of Kansas a few years ago, or rather Jayhawks. Confused them with Kansas State, but Kansas Jayhawks a few years ago. I just think they're on a mission after missing the tournament entirely last year to make it back to the Final Four. So I'm going with Carolina as well. In the next matchup, I believe you had St. Mary's and Charleston, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct? Who do you have advancing?
I have Charleston once again going to the Sweet 16. I have them beating St. Mary's, two very similar teams in terms of personnel and how they like to play the game. I think Charleston will get the better of them and advance. My Cinderella run continues.
I don't love Alabama making a deep run, but because they're playing Grand Canyon in my matchup, I will go with Alabama to make the Sweet 16. In the next matchup, we have New Mexico and Baylor. Who do you have advancing to the Sweet 16?
A matchup of a very veteran head coach and Scott Drew and, kind of an up and coming guy. Rich Pitino has the name, but, someone who I would describe still as an up and coming guy. Would go with Baylor in this one. I think veteran coaching is going to win the day.
Lobos making it to the Sweet 16. They're another one of my Cinderella teams that can make a run. I am going with New Mexico to make it there. And then in the last round of 32 matchup in this region, we've got, I believe I had Dayton and Arizona. You had Nevada and Arizona?
Nope, we got the same one.
Oh, same one. Yeah, that's
Oh,
right.
yep.
So do you have? Yep. What do you have
So
advancing?
I got I think Deron Holmes and that Dayton offense is going to be a lot for Arizona to handle, but I still think Arizona will win and advance to play against Baylor in the Elite Eight
Caleb
or
Love will
Sweet
be on a
16.
mission. I am going with Arizona to advance. So there you go. There. So in the Sweet 16, I have North Carolina, and then who did you have? Do you have Charleston?
Yep.
Okay. So who do you have advancing?
I think that's when Charleston's run ends. I think uh, Baycott and the rest of the guys on Carolina will just out talent Charleston, and Hubert Davis out coaches, and Tar Heels get it done.
I have Carolina and Alabama. Carolina will show why it's a basketball school, and Alabama will show why it's a football school primarily. I am going with Tar Heels to the Elite Eight. And then who do you have in your final Elite Eight matchup in this, or rather, Sweet 16 matchup? And then who do you have advancing?
So I got Baylor over Arizona. I think it would be cool, if Arizona advanced and you have the storyline of Caleb Love and stuff like that. But I think Baylor being led by Scott Drew. I think this Baylor team has showed flashes this year of the national championship team from a few years ago. I think they're really poised to make a deep run.
I have New Mexico and Arizona. I think the run ends for New Mexico there. Sorry, J-Ro, but I do want to give a shout out to one of my favorite professors, Steph Smith, who went to Arizona and one of my professors in my master's program. So I'll make her happy and pick Arizona. So in my Elite Eight, Chris, I have the 1 and 2 seed pretty chalk. The Caleb Love game, North Carolina and Arizona. And I've got the Tar Heels advancing to the Final Four. I just think, like I talked about it, they've got experience. I think they've got the one of the more complete teams. There's a reason they earned the 1 seed in this tournament after kind of being on that 2 seed for most of kind of the early, rather the later projections. But I've got North Carolina going to the Final Four. How about you? Who's advancing to your Final Four?
Yeah, I also have North Carolina advancing to the Final Four. I think that this is a region that North Carolina should really not have trouble with, which means that North Carolina will get upset in the second round. But I think they have a lot of firepower. I think RJ Davis is going to tick-tock his way to the Final Four.
So there you go. We both agree that North Carolina will make it to the Final Four. So that's actually the first region that we both agreed in because we had different teams in the previous two regions. I was going to ask you because I didn't necessarily ask you about the South region, Chris. Who do you think has a more easier path to the Final Four? Is it UNC or is it Houston?
I'm going to go with UNC. I think Houston right off the jump could have a really tough matchup against Texas A&M. I think the or Nebraska really. I think Houston also um, I think they're also a team where you could have to play Duke at the bottom. You could have to play Kentucky at the bottom. You could have to play Marquette at the bottom. I think all four top four seeds in that South region could win, a national championship, have national championship talent, caliber rosters to go and get it done. I don't really see that out of Alabama. I don't really see that out of Arizona either. I kind of see it in Baylor, not really high on Clemson, not as high on St. Mary. So I just think across the board, I think Carolina's got the easier path.
I agree with you. I don't like the way that Carolina ended the AC tournament because they were, I think, -9.5 favorites going into that AC tournament final against their in-state rivals, NC State, and just kind of completely laid an egg, which you don't expect with having one of the best guards in the country and uh, uh, RJ Davis. But I think that given their Final Four path, I do think that Arizona's been known to choke in the tournament. I just kind of like Carolina to make it to the Final Four, even over Houston. So let's now move on to the final region, Chris, and that is the Midwest. We start with 1 and 16 Purdue taking on the winner of Montana State and Grambling State. I mentioned earlier in the podcast last year, Farley Dickinson was the second 16 seed ever to upset a number 1 seed, and that team happened to be Purdue. Of course, Zach Edey, the two-time reigning National Player of the Year, most likely. I think the first guy to do it since Ralph Sampson, so he's in pretty a big company. Who do you think ends up winning this matchup? Does Purdue get past the hump this year?
Yeah, I definitely think they get over the hump. A lot of shooting. Zach Edey is the headliner, but Purdue also, with a lot of good 3-point shooting in the form of Fletcher Lawyer, among some others. So I think they'll get it done this year.
I agree with you. I'm going with Purdue. Not much else to say there. We move now to the 8-9 matchup, Utah State and TCU. Who do you have advancing?
I got TCU, no Ryan Odom for Utah State this year, and two of Utah State's best players also went to VCU. VCU losing in the Atlantic 10 championship final. I think TCU, a more complete team. I think they'll win the 9 over the 8.
I agree with you. I'm going with TCU. I just think I trust the Big 12 conference schedule over Utah State's conference. So I am going with TCU as well. We move now to the 5-12 matchup. Gonzaga. I believe, Chris, that every year Mark Few has been with the Gonzaga Bulldogs as their head coach. They have made the tournament, which I think is as impressive as a run you'll see in the sport. Gonzaga has been a runner-up a couple of years, 2017 and I believe 2021. So you look at this matchup against McNeese. Do you think Zaga makes it to the second round?
I'm going to go with McNeese in the 12 over 5. I think McNeese are a bunch of dogs. I think Gonzaga has been, they've had some great tournament runs. They've also had some runs where they've come up well short. I think this is going to be one of those short runs this year. I got McNeese.
Gonzaga is going to make a run for me as a spoiler alert. So I'm going with the Bulldogs to advance to the second round. We move now to the 4-13 matchup, Kansas and Samford. Chris, Kansas kind of flamed out of the Big 12 tournament. I know they had some injuries, so they're not coming in on the best footing against Samford. But do you think they advance to the second round?
Kansas has had, like you said, a lot of injuries. I think if Kansas was at full strength, it'd be different. I am actually going to go with Samford and set up a 12 versus 13 next round matchup. I think if Kansas was healthy, it'd be different, but I'm going to go with the 13 here.
Wow, it's certainly a take there. I'm going to go with Kansas. I just think they'll have enough to get over Samford in the first round. So I am going with the Jayhawks to make it to the second round. We move next to 6-11, South Carolina and Oregon. Who do you have advancing in this matchup?
I've been a South Carolina fan all year. I think Oregon, after their great Pac-12 tournament run, is going to flame out. I've got South Carolina advancing in this one.
Chris, I picked every 11 seed to advance to the second round, and I am sticking with it here. Oregon will defeat South Carolina. I believe in Dana Altman. He's a veteran of this tournament. I think they get it done against South Carolina. We move next to 3-14, Creighton and Akron. Who do you have advancing this matchup?
Shout out LeBron James, but unfortunately, I will pick Creighton in this one. I think don't really know a whole lot about Akron. Creighton was a Cinderella team of mine last year. I had them being a surprise entry into the Final Four. It did not happen, but I think they're poised to make another deep run this year.
Yeah, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, LeBron and Steph Curry were born at the same hospital, I think, in Akron. So, hey,
Sounds
definitely,
right.
yeah, that's a heck of a city to be known for. The fact that you have two of the all-time greats born in the same hospital. But I agree with you. I'm going with Creighton. Doug McDermott. I always have to mix up the name. I think it's Craig McDermott's the player, and Doug McDermott's his dad. But
Yes.
by
Yep.
the way, I always think that I don't know if you see this, Chris. I always thought that Doug McDermott kind of looked like Justin Fuente. Do you see that at all, or?
I would have to look at I would have to look it up, but I hang on. We'll do the next game and I'll go ahead and I'll Google Doug McDermott real quick.
Yeah, for sure. You go ahead and do that. So I have Texas against UVA and Colorado State. Of course, as Tech fans, we know that UVA controversially made the tournament. Believe it or not, they actually haven't won, Chris, an NCAA tournament game since they won it all in 2019. They got upset by Furman last year in Ohio, I think a couple years before that. So, look, I personally don't think they should have made the tournament. I think there were several schools that had I think were, first of all, higher in the net, but also just had a better resume. But they is what it is. I kind of want UVA to win that first matchup though, because I've got a friend from high school, Brian Leonard. Shout out to Brian, who went to Texas, and then his dad went to UVA. So I'm kind of hoping if they win, they can drive down to Charlotte and see the game. But I think regardless, Texas advancing the second round. I am going with the Longhorns.
I'm also going with the Longhorns. I actually started dating a UVA grad recently. I know, what am I thinking? But I think if UVA beats Colorado State, I think we would do the same thing and go to the game. I'd be decked out in tech gear, root for Texas, and she'd be rooting for UVA. But I do have Texas advancing regardless. I do think though that Colorado State will win that play-in game.
Okay, sounds good. And then, did you have a chance to look up Doug McDermott?
Yeah, I can kind of see it. I think there's a little bit of a resemblance, but I wouldn't say like it's like the spitting image or something like that.
Okay, that's fair. I'll take it. So we both agree, though, Texas is gonna advance there. And yeah, hopefully you do get to go to the game because I think Charlotte that's a great venue to host some of the March Madness tournament games. And then we got Tennessee and St. Peter's. We all remember St. Peter's made it to the Elite Eight back in 2022. They upset Kentucky as a 15 seed to start out that run. Do you think they upset Tennessee? I mean, Rick Barnes is probably next to Matt Painter, Chris, one of the more accomplished coaches in the game without a ring.
Correct. I think what Tennessee has that Kentucky team doesn't have is they have a guy named Dalton Knecht, and I think that Player of the Year candidate is going to power Tennessee past St. Peter's.
I agree with you. Corey Van Dyke, a guy one of my great friends. He's a big college basketball aficionado. He was high on Tennessee though all year, so I'm going with Tennessee based on his recommendation to advance to the second round. So now you look at the second round in that region. I believe we both had Purdue and TCU. Who do you have making out to the Sweet 16?
I think Matt Painter's going to have a little something going here. I think they're going to beat TCU and advance.
I think this is Zach Edey's tournament. I mean, let's be honest. I don't think he's going to get drafted in the NBA. So this is kind of his last kind of big stage games before he goes to Europe or wherever he ends up playing. I'm going with the Boilermakers to advance to the Sweet 16. Shout out to my guy, Sam Wiersma. In the second round, I have Gonzaga and Kansas. You actually went the complete opposite direction. McNeese and Samford, who ends up advancing to the Sweet 16.
I got McNeese. I think McNeese is going to outdog Samford in this one.
I'm going Gonzaga over Kansas. I think the injuries catch up with Kansas to a veteran team like the Bulldogs, so I've got the Zags advancing. In the next matchup, I believe, I had Oregon and Creighton. You had South Carolina and Creighton.
Mm-hmm.
So who do you have advancing?
I think Trey Alexander is going to power the Creighton Jays past South Carolina. I think South Carolina has been a cool story going from bottom of the barrel SEC team all of last year to one of the top teams this year, but I think it's going to come to an end in the round of 32. I got Creighton.
I agree with you. I am going with Creighton as well. And then in the final round of 32 matchup, we both have Texas and Tennessee. Who wins the Battle of the T's?
Nothing. Texas being a battle-tested Big 12 team is going to give Tennessee trouble, but I think once again, Player of the Year Dalton Knecht is going to power Tennessee past Texas and have them advance to the next round.
People might hate me for saying this as a Tech guy, but I actually kind of like Rocky Top. I think it's one of the better. It's not Nurse Sandman, but I think it's one of the better kind of catchy fight songs out there. So I am going with Tennessee to advance. And then, so in my matchup, Chris, I have in the Sweet 16 Purdue and Gonzaga. I'm going with Purdue to the Elite Eight. Who do you have playing Purdue and advancing in that matchup?
So I got Purdue over McNeese. I think once again, like you said, it could be Zach Edey's tournament this year. I think Purdue is going to have a much easier road to the Elite Eight than they would have last year if they were to have gotten past Farley Dickinson. I got Purdue advancing.
And like I said, I got Purdue as well over Gonzaga. And then we both agreed that Creighton would play Tennessee in the other Sweet 16 matchup. Who do you have advancing?
Man, I love Creighton. I want to pick Creighton with my heart, but I'm going to pick Tennessee with my brain. I think really calling card for Creighton is their offensive efficiency, and I think Tennessee, they defend the three really well. They get you out of rhythm. They make you force turnovers, and then I think having a really standout player will also help with that. I got Tennessee going.
I agree with you. I also have Tennessee advancing to the Elite Eight. So we both agree that Purdue and Tennessee will be the last two standing in the Midwest region, 1 and 2. Who goes to the Final Four?
I actually got Tennessee advancing into the Final Four. 2 1 seeds, 2 2 seeds for mine. I've liked Tennessee all year. I think kind of like Corey, I've kind of had them in the back of my head as a team that can really make a deep run. And I think out of the 2 seed, they have a pretty favorable region where Creighton, arguably I look at this and, they're the weakest 3 seed and, Purdue, I think, a very strong team, but, Tennessee only has to be good that day. And I think they can get it done.
I gotta admit, I'm not like crazy high on Purdue. However, last time a 16 seed beat a 1 seed, when UVA got upset UMBC, what happened the next year? UVA ended up winning the title. I just have some weird kind of vibes with Purdue. I feel like they're gonna maybe get some breaks they weren't expecting to go their way, and I'm going with the Boilermakers to make it to the Final Four. So let's see if I can remember this correctly, Chris. I think we only agreed on one region. I think on one Final Four matchup. I have North Carolina and Illinois. You have North Carolina and UConn. And
Mhm.
then in the Final Four, you have, I believe, Marquette and Tennessee, and I have Houston and Purdue. So I actually have what, 3 1 seeds and a 3 seed, and I think you had what, 2 1 seeds, 2 2 seeds.
Yes, sir.
So in the first Final Four, let's go with the one that we have a completely different one. So I have Houston and Purdue, and you have Marquette and Tennessee. Who goes to the championship for you?
I think it's a battle of two dominant backcourts, and I know I have his jersey behind me. As much as I love Tyler Kolek in that Marquette run, I think better coaching and a better backcourt will prevail. I've got Tennessee advancing to the national championship game.
I've got Purdue and Houston, and there will be a problem for Houston. Houston, we will have a problem in the Final Four. I'm going with the Boilermakers to advance to the championship game. I think, like I talked about in Matt Payne, or maybe I think if you have to pick one guy, probably the number one guy, best coach in the game without a ring. I think Purdue's going to get to the championship game for him for the first time. Hard to believe they've never gotten it that far. I don't think they've even got to a Final Four under Painter. So I think this would be a first time for him as well. So I've got Purdue and you have Tennessee in the championship game. And
Yep.
then I have North Carolina and Illinois, and you have North Carolina and UConn. Does UConn advance to the Final Four, or does their quest for repeat end here, or rather to a championship, but or does their quest end in a semifinal?
I think their quest for a repeat continues into the national championship game. I think that they are the best team in America. I think North Carolina is really good. But I think that out of the 4 1 seeds, they were the weakest. And I think that they will fall in the Final Four to UConn. And I think Dan Hurley is going to be coaching for a national championship, back-to-back national championships, I should say.
I've got North Carolina and Illinois, and I am going with North Carolina. I just think that in that kind of matchup, you got the veteran guard play, R.J. Davis, Armando Bacot, Hubert Davis on the sideline. Roy Williams travels with the team. You know he's going to give Hubert Davis all his great advice. I just think the Tar Heels get it done and go to the national championship game. So I have 2 1 seeds in the championship, North Carolina and Purdue, and you have UConn taking on Tennessee. So we just have completely different finals. I love this. This is awesome. Who do you
Mhm.
have winning in your championship? Does UConn, because if UConn wins, they would be, I think, the first team since the 06-07 Gators under Billy Donovan to repeat. Do you have them repeating, or do you think the championship goes to Rocky Top, Tennessee?
I think UConn wins it. I think they will have been in the moment. I think Tristan Newton, Cam Spencer, et cetera, are going to propel them to back-to-back national championships. That never happens. It's probably not going to happen, but it's really, really tough in college athletics to repeat, or in any type of pro sport in general. But I've just UConn and Tennessee have been, I think, my two kind of the whole year that I've kind of thought like, I could see UConn repeating, and UConn time and time again has been really good. Tennessee, with the exception of a couple of blips, have been really good. I just think that they're the two best teams in this tournament, and went with them.
I have North Carolina and Purdue, and I was kind of thinking about it, Chris. I've been probably doing a bracket now for what, maybe 12, 15 years. In terms of being in competitive bracket pools, I've probably been doing it now for 12, 15 years. I've picked North Carolina a couple times, and every year they seem to go far when I do pick them. And obviously, you got, on the other hand, Purdue. I think, like I just talked about it, maybe they have similar UVA vibes where they lose to a 16 one year, come back the next year, and win it all. But I was thinking about it back in 2019 when we were about to graduate from undergrad. I picked North Carolina. I remember that year. They didn't end up winning it that year, but I just think, how about, every 5 years, maybe, you pick the same team. So I'm going with the North Carolina Tar Heels to win the national championship. I think R.J. Davis ends up winning the most outstanding player, the Final Four, and the Tar Heels end up hoisting the trophy under Northern Virginia native Hubert Davis. So I think that's the way it goes. So there you have it. I've got North Carolina over Purdue winning the championship. It would be the first for Carolina since I mentioned earlier, 2017. And Chris has UConn repeating over Tennessee to win the trophy for the second year in a row. Again, it would be the first since 06-07 when Florida did it. So there you go, Chris. Took us let me look at my time here. Almost basically an hour, kind of go through game by game and make our picks. And I know we're going to be wrong, but I think that's the beauty of this tournament. I actually think, Chris, I don't know if you agree with this. I found that the more you know about college basketball, the more likely you're going to be wrong because, we're all analytical. Like, we're going to pick this team because of this team because of that. But, you got some random Joe in your office pool that just likes the mascot or just likes the color of the team, and they end up picking some random team, and they end up making a big run. So I've always thought that the more you know about college basketball, the worse you end up actually doing in these tournaments.
Yeah, I 100% agree. My youngest sister, I have three younger siblings. My youngest sister, Olivia, she's a huge sports fan, but she was not when she was younger. And she's had a few, I mean, absolute monster upset picks. Like she correctly called VCU to the Final Four when she was like, 3 years old, barely
Wow.
able to, know what, how a college basketball game flows. Correctly picked Wichita State to the Final Four a few years ago. Correctly picked UMBC over UVA because that's where my dad went to school. He's a UMBC Golden Retriever. So it is cool how, I think that really just promotes the accessibility of these things is, you could really like the look of the McNeese mascot and you could pick them and they could just have the 2 weeks of their lives and go really far. And then congratulations, you just won your pool because nobody else picked them. So that's the beauty of the sport. And like a big reason I picked UConn was I've correctly picked the national champion 3 times in my life. And two of the 3 times, not last year's UConn teams, but the other two UConn teams in my lifetime where I happened to pick them. The other one was Villanova over Michigan. Um, Maybe 4 or 5 years ago at this point when we were in college. But yeah, so it's cool just how you never really know, and it's that's just the beauty of it.
Yeah, I think I've only also picked the national championship correctly twice. 2013 Louisville, and then 2018 Villanova. I think the same year that you had them. So I thought every 5 years I'd be correct, and then last year I wasn't correct. So I've got to kind of start a new streak there. I was going to ask you though. I mean, I know we kind of briefly alluded to this earlier when we were talking about the regions in general, but who would you say you would be worried about most in terms of your champion facing? So in your case, UConn, that could knock them out early before they even get to a Final Four or championship game.
I kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier, but I would really worry if they had to play Auburn in a Sweet 16 game. I think Auburn's physicality would give Cam Spencer a lot of trouble. I think Auburn's backcourt could really disrupt UConn defensively. I think UConn does play, in my opinion, the toughest region in the tournament where I think they're going to get past Stetson, but Northwestern could be a dogfight, Auburn could be a dogfight, and Iowa State could be a dogfight. But Auburn is kind of the one to me that I'm circling as the one that could give UConn the most trouble early on.
I'm going with a team for UNC that you were high on. That's Baylor. I just think, when you're a champion, you kind of know what it's like. Scott Drew, your battle test in the tournament, you know what it's like to kind of play in a survive and advance kind of style. So I think Baylor, if they can get there, would definitely pose a problem for UNC. And then also, I mean, look, if Caleb Love and the Wildcats of Arizona end up making it and playing UNC, I mean, he's got to be highly motivated to do well if he plays his former team. So I definitely don't think it's going to be a cakewalk for North Carolina. I was curious. I know, we were kind of looking at it earlier, but how do you go about kind of making your some of your picks? I think a lot of times I look at guard play. I think guards have a really big opportunity to have a big impact in this tournament. So I often look at who are the guards on some of these teams, and then great coaching. So you look at it: Matt Izzo, Rick Barnes, Matt Painter, Scott Drew, Kelvin Sampson. I just think great coaching has the ability to really make a difference in this tournament. So I would say great coaching and guard play are some of my key factors. How about you? Are there any others that kind of stand out to you?
I think I look behind the 3-point line first. I look for teams who are really aggressive defensively, and I look for teams who can shoot the three well. I also look for teams who can defend the three well, which are things that UConn and Tennessee both do. And Ken Pomeroy, Virginia Tech alum, I do look at Ken Pom offensive and defensive efficiency a little bit, like just kind of like when we get late into like the Elite Eight, the Final Four, and stuff like that. I'll kind of do a little all right, UConn's this and Ken Pom offense, Ken Pom defense, and I'll compare and throw it out the window. I actually heard something really interesting the other day. I know somebody who makes her predictions based on like if like she's not sure what to do, she'll look at their free throw percentage, and whichever team has the highest team free throw percentage, she'll pick. And she said that has seemed to work for her more often than not. So I had never heard that before. I thought that was kind of a cool little tidbit. So yeah, it's pretty cool, like different ways you can go about picking them.
Yeah, I also like watching the conference tournaments. I think that's kind of that week is kind of my kind of crash course and sort of who I like to make it deep into the tournament because oftentimes it's not who the best team is record wise; it's who's the best team coming in playing well. So I
Mhm.
definitely look to that. But I also don't think it's the whole thing because, there have been plenty of times where an eventual champion, lost their conference tournament final and end up winning the whole thing.
Mhm.
So it's not the only thing, but I do think it's a good predictor maybe for how you might play in the tournament. So there you go, Chris. As always, great catching up with you on the big dance. And yeah, can't wait for it to happen. It's going to be a lot of fun watching this tournament game by game and see what happens. I want to transition, Chris, before we close out the podcast and talk about the NIT. First of all, Virginia Tech is in the NIT. I think they're playing tomorrow night against Richmond, so that's kind of a nice in-state rivalry. I think they did a good job this year, kind of matching up teams geographically to kind of get some excitement in that first round. But I think the big thing, Chris, is that you look at it, a lot of teams that were going to automatically be in the NIT declined their invites. I'm trying to think. You had teams like Oklahoma and Pitt and St. John's and Syracuse. A lot of people have cited the early transfer portal as a factor. NIL, you want to start negotiating as early as you can. I don't know if you saw the, as crazy of a, this shows you how crazy of a college basketball fan I am. I watched 3 hours of selection shows last night when you talk about the
Mhm.
men's, the women's, and the men's NIT. So I was loving all of it. Tom Crean had a really passionate rant
Mhm.
about
Mhm.
the need to play. He was talking about how, if you want individual players to sit down, that's fine. But just the opportunity for to players to play and really develop your team. I think it's important that these teams play. But what do you think about kind of everything that's transpired? What do you think about the future of the NIT? And man, I just think with NIL and the transfer portal, it's completely changed the face of college athletics.
Yeah, I mean, I'm 100% with Tom Crean, to be honest with that. Like you can recruit, you have the whole summer to recruit, you have the whole summer to NIL, you have the whole summer to, transfer portal, whatever. But like the guys that are staying in especially maybe the seventh, eighth guys off the bench that are going to come in and be your fourth or fifth guys in the starting lineup, for next year, those are really valuable minutes against good teams. Like, especially, I'm looking at the NIT from an A10 lens because we have 4 teams in it this year. Virginia Tech playing Richmond, Loyola Chicago is in it, VCU is in it, and St. Joseph's is in it. Um, it's really tough for the A10 to get good quality non-conference games. They're either going to a in-season tournament and playing somebody, or they're going and they're playing like a 300 Ken Palm team because the Power Five doesn't really play Atlantic 10 teams in standalone games anymore. So it's invaluable minutes. Like I said, I'm with Tom Crean, and I think it'll be really interesting over the next 5 years to see if we kind of see what's happening in college football, and the power conferences are going to maybe try to be their own little thing, and then everyone else is going to kind of be on this side.
Yeah, I agree with you. And look, I'm for players getting paid because I always thought it was unfair for the longest time that these networks can make all these ratings from the March Madness and the college football playoff, but the players get no cut in it when they're the ones kind of putting in the most risk in terms of they're putting their body and their livelihoods on the line. But I've always just wondered, Chris, what just happened to playing for love of the game? I mean, now it's just all of a sudden like, oh well, we gotta enter the transfer portal and we gotta worry about NIL, and it's like what happened to just loving to play the game and loving to hoop? I just feel like that's kind of what's been lost here, I think, with the NIT. And also, I think it's great basketball, man. Look, you got the big dance, the March Madness on Thursday, Friday, and the weekends, but then you've got some of these great midweek games during the week to kind of keep
Mhm.
you excited. You talked about how, Virginia Tech's in it and you know several of the teams in it. So I still think it's a great tournament, a great opportunity for teams to play in. And obviously, it's not the big dance, but I think it's a great opportunity to play. And if you win, 4 or 5 games, who's not to say that could, if you have a guy maybe like Sean Padula who's thinking about transferring, look, we just had a great run. We won 4 or 5 games, played well into March. If I can get one more guy on the transfer portal, we can kind of build some great chemistry on the team. I mean, I think the NIT is honestly a great recruiting tool to maybe some of these recruits you're trying to get in the transfer portal, or maybe some of the guys on your team you're trying to keep to say, hey, we built some good foundations at the end of the season. We can really take that into next season and do well. So I have to ask you, what are your predictions? I mean, you've got several of the teams. You've got Tech. Who do you think? I know I don't have the bracket necessarily pulled up in front of me, but do you like Tech's chances, or do you like maybe one of these A10 teams that you've seen a good amount to win the NIT?
Yeah, well, first of all, I hope that Sean Padula doesn't transfer. But I think if Tech's playing well, I think they can play with anybody in the country. But I think it'll be a last ride for Hunter Couture. I think for a lot of guys. It'll be an opportunity, I think, for, Tech to generate a little bit of momentum heading into the offseason. I think a team, on in my little A10 world that I would be watching out for is the Loyola Chicago Ramblers. They were a team that was bottom of the A10 team a year ago. This year they've come in, they split the regular season title with Richmond. They were bounced in heartbreaking fashion in the A10 tournament, but they have been a team all year that has been really good. I think that they can make a deep NIT run if the guys are locked in. But I think Drew Valentine's kind of figured out, how to win his way at Loyola. And I think, maybe the NIT could generate some momentum for them heading into the next year.
And of course, Loyola Chicago has sister Jean, so maybe God's on their side. Who knows? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, with all their luck in the success they've had in the tournament. Yeah, like I agree with you. I'm just hoping Hunter Couture has a great last run. We all remember that epic performance he had against Duke a couple years ago in the NCAA tournament. So we want to make sure that he goes out with playing some great basketball for the Hokies and playing deep into the NIT. So hopefully Tech can do so. And then the last topic I had for you was women's basketball. We didn't have a chance to really go necessarily in depth on the women's side of things with their bracket, but Virginia Tech again, a really good team, 4 seed. Unfortunately, the status of Liz Kitley is unclear at this as of this recording. But I mean, I think that's obviously going to be Tech's chances. I mean, to make a deep run, if they really can only do it if Kitley, in my opinion, plays. So I'm still optimistic that they haven't ruled it out as an ACL or anything like that, like they did with the Notre Dame player. So I'm hopeful that she can play at some point. But I just want to ask you, have you followed the team much as well? And what do you think is uh their ceiling? I guess again, it depends on whether or not Liz Kitley can play, of course.
Hey, if Liz Kitley's in, I think that they're as likely as anybody to, compete in the Final Four and win a national championship, just as long as they don't play Notre Dame, because that seems to be Kenny Brooks and Liz Kitley's kryptonite. But I think I think if they don't have Liz, I think they would even struggle in their first round game against Marshall. But I think, Georgia Amore, obviously as talented as they come. I saw a graphic on Twitter promoting another game against Iowa next year, and Georgia was on that graphic, and I saw that was generating a lot of buzz on, is she coming back? What's going on? And I think she can, will that team to a win or two, but I think, they really need Liz, player of the year candidate if Caitlin Clark wasn't, in the WNBA yet. It's tough to see Tech going far, like you said, without Liz, and I'm not super optimistic, unfortunately, because, if Kenny Brooks is doing a lot of politicking, like he is in his press conference, I think if she was good to go, I think he'd be saying, hey, she's good, so I don't know. It doesn't make me super excited, but they'll also have the whole Castle Guard for 2 games at their back. So I think that will also be helpful, but you really hope if they're a second weekend team that they get Liz back, because, it could end quickly if they don't.
No, I agree with you. I think, you took the words right out of my mouth. I was like, Kenny Smith should run. I mean, Kenny Smith, Kenny Brooks should run for president with the way he was being a politician with those vague answers last night. But no, I agree with you. I think Kitley's got to come back for them to have any chance. And I also think, Chris, I don't know what do you think about this? Is that I think Georgia Amore should go to the WNBA. I mean, I think last projection I saw with the draft, she's ninth. Liz is not coming back. You've seen how the team has been without her. I mean, it's been Amore and a bunch of ladies. I mean, Matilda Eck has scored 0 points in 3 straight games, which I think is impressively bad. I mean, it's hard to do that when you're a D1 starter. So, and I've met Matilda Eck. She's wonderful, but I just think, you got to keep it where it is. But I just think, Chris, Amore's number 9. I mean, is there really much money difference from 9 to 1? I mean, I guess maybe the argument you can make is that Caitlin Clark's going to graduate. Liz Kitley's going to be graduating. Amore could be one of the premier faces of college basketball, but I just think, if you're already number 9, is there really much of a difference between, say, like 4 and 9? I'm not so sure. Go out with your BFF and roommate Liz, and again, I know Hokie fans want her to come back. I'd love for her to come back. I'm sure you'd love for her to come back, but I just think, based on, Kitley graduating, Kane graduating, I mean, the team's going to be different next year. I just think that Amore should probably go to the WNBA regardless of how this season plays out. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. And I think it's kind of funny how, Amore could leave on the women's side. Padula could transfer on the men's side. Liz is definitely gone after this year. Kayla King's gone. And, for Tech basketball, there's kind of this upward trend for a little bit. And I think we might, be seeing like kind of the beginning of the end of a really good Tech basketball run on both the men's and the women's side. And it's kind of funny because like during that, Tech basketball high, um, the football team was just absolutely in the gutter. And now for the first time in probably 7 or 8 years, there's a lot of optimism around the Virginia Tech football program. And it's kind of funny how, like, as the men's and women's basketball teams are going down, the football team this year, a lot of people are saying could be a 9-10 win team. Could be, I'm even seeing some really crazy predictions, like could be a dark horse playoff contender and things like that. So it's kind of funny how, like, the timing is just right. How, when football team goes through a rough patch, hey, we'll just kind of distract you with a little bit of hoops and, wait till, with Babcock's like, wait till I get this right again. And now, like, okay, basketball can kind of go back to being, we'll win a few conference games and we'll upset a few teams here and there. And, but football is going to be the big cash cow the way that it used to be. And I mean, I think that's Virginia Tech's identity is their football program. So I think the next 5 years of Tech athletics will be interesting because if Brent Pry gets it right, I think it'll kind of be the Tech that we grew up with, I guess. Really perennial football power in the ACC.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, do you think Mike Young should be on the hot seat? I mean, I know there's been a lot of fan chatter. I just think, look, I mean, he was 10-10 the ACC. I mean, honestly, I mean, look at all the bubble teams Hokies beat. I mean, Iowa State, they played FAU. I don't know, I don't think they beat them, but they played them. NC State, they beat them in Raleigh. I mean, but they were just terrible away from Castle. I think they only had 2 road wins. So I just think, I mean, look, he had a lot. He had the bad road. I mean, it was just a weird season. You had the bad season on the road. I think the fact that they still finished 10-10 is pretty respectable in the ACC.
Sure.
And I just think if football, as you're talking about, kind of comes back and really starts to have a good run here, that'll probably take some pressure off of Mike Young. And then just in general, he's such a likable guy that you want him to do well. So I just think, I don't know if hot seat is the right term. I just think, he does have to make moves in the transfer portal like every other coach has to do in the country, but I don't know that I'd put him on the hot seat. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think if you win a conference tournament, especially like if you're like Virginia Tech basketball, who really, like, just being honest, has no business winning an ACC basketball conference tournament. You know, I think I think a thing that Virginia Tech really hangs its hat on are the people and how amazing the fan base is. I think at times the fan base's expectations for certain programs is maybe above what it should be. Um, I think I'm not saying that, like if we miss the tournament 10 years in a row, that's probably not great. But, if Mike Young is a 500 ACC coach, but, every 3 or 4 years we're going to the tournament, maybe we win a game in the tournament, I think that's a pretty reasonable expectation for Virginia Tech men's basketball. Maybe I'm being a little bit too, down on where my expectations is, but I just think objectively speaking, when you look at, the facilities and who Tech is competing with in the ACC, these kind of perennial basketball schools, I don't always think that the expectation should be, hey, we should go to the tournament every year. Now, going 2-9 on the road, that's not great. That's a sign that you're not really preparing your team to be successful on the road. So I think on the other side, I can see why fans are upset that, hey, if, maybe if we're 5-5 on the road or, 6-5, 5-6, then you're probably on the bubble. If we beat Pitt on the road, Syracuse on the road, and I forget what other team we lost to on the road. I think Wake Forest, maybe. We got drilled by them early on. Maybe if those are wins, then, Virginia Tech season outlook is a little bit different. They're 13-7. Maybe they win a couple tournament games. Maybe they sneak into the dance as an 11 seed or something like that, and then it's a different story. But I definitely, to answer your question in a very long-winded way, I don't think that Mike Young should be on the hot seat, but I think the mediocrity continues. And I think if there isn't any roster development in the next couple of years, maybe if you're Witt, you consider making a change, but I think he should be good for right now.
I agree with you. And again, now I have the list in front of me. Wake Forest, Virginia, Clemson, Boise State, Vermont, who was the AEC champ, Iowa State, Big 12 champ, NC State, ACC tournament champ. Those are all teams Tech beat. So Again, just a weird season. Again, the road record, I think, is what killed him ultimately. But I do agree with you. I think Mike Young probably, because of the AC Tournament Championship, has a few more years of a leash before maybe things start heating up for him. And then last question I promised, Chris, before I let you go is you mentioned it, Virginia Tech football, a lot of expectations around them. I think they returned to every offensive starter. Kyron Drones has been getting a lot of hype as the quarterback. Do you buy the hype? Does this team win 9 or 10 games? Maybe be a fringe playoff contender? I think that's probably too far. But 9, 10 wins, do you think reasonable? Do you think it can happen? I know Clemson's coming into Lane next year, so that's going to be a big game for sure.
I think nine's definitely possible, and I'm more buying into the coaching staff because every single player that that I think fans thought could transfer, except for one, they all came back and they all said, we all want to run it back. We all want to play for this team, this staff. And I think in like the NIL transfer portal, like world that we live in now, the fact that all those people were saying, I'm coming back, Tootin's back, Drones is back, Ali Jennings is back. I can't think of the other wide receiver's name off the top of my head, but everyone's coming back and playing. It's a huge deal. And yeah, I think with that in mind, I think it goes to show that the players love playing for the staff. And the staff seems like they kind of found their footing towards the end of the season. And, they boat raced Tulane in the Military Bowl, granted a very undermanned Tulane team, but still, good to get that bowl win for offseason confidence anyway. And yeah, I think I'm not buying the fringe playoff contender stuff. I don't know if I'm buying the 10-win stuff, but I think they can hit 9 and, go 9-3, go to a bowl game, play for a 10-win season. I don't think that's unreasonable at all, especially with their schedule this year.
Yeah, and I mean Brent Pryce, such a likable guy. I think that's the clear. I know maybe you're not obligated to speak on it because you were kind of there when Fuente was there with Hokie Vision, but I'll say it for you. Maybe you can agree or disagree. I think the way Pry has ingratiated himself with the community is certainly. I think it was definitely an upgrade in that respect. So I'm definitely rooting for him. Chris, man, it's been such a pleasure getting to do this again with you for the third year in a row. And man, a big week too in Blacksburg when you think about it. NIT men's tomorrow. Wednesday, Vanderbilt and Columbia will play in Blacksburg for the first four. Blacksburg is actually getting a first four. Shout out to Jake Lyman, who's coming back as the voice of Vanderbilt to call that game. Then you've got the first round for the women Friday. Saturday, if Ohio State loses and Tech wins, Tech may be in the running to host another NIT game Saturday. And then, of course, you've got Sunday. Hopefully, Tech wins the women and play in the second round. And all these other sports, baseball number 19. So I know you're a Davidson guy now, but I know deep down you're still a Tech guy. So big week in Blacksburg. And Chris, as I mentioned, thank you so much for joining me, man. It's always a pleasure to catch up.
Always a pleasure. Yeah, I wish it was in Blacksburg this week. Lots of fun stuff going on. Really takes me back to my undergrad for sure.
For sure. Well, thank you so much to Mr. Chris Finch, the video coordinator for Davidson Athletics, Virginia Tech alum twice over in 2019 and 2021, for joining me on the latest edition of the Post with BP as we previewed March Madness, made our picks, talked men's, women's, and so many other topics. Again, thank you so much to Chris Finch. I'm your host, Billy Parvatam. We thank everybody for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Enjoy March Madness.